Morning, my son-in-law told me to get out of my own kitchen. I was standing at the stove making grits. Not his grits. Mine. The kind my mother taught me to make, slow stirred with a little butter and just enough salt, the kind that takes patience and doesn't rush for anybody. I had been making them that way for 43 years in that kitchen. The same stove, the same cast iron pot I bought at a yard sale in 1987 for $2.50. He walked in, looked at me standing there in my robe and slippers, and said, "Can you do that later? We're trying to sleep." I didn't say anything. I turned back to the pot and kept stirring. He stood there a moment longer, like he expected me to apologize, then walked back down the hall. I heard my daughter's bedroom door close. I finished my grits. I ate them alone at the table by the window, watching the mockingbirds fight over the feeder I'd hung in the yard 20 years ago. That was a Tuesday in February. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. My name is Roberta. I'm 67 years old. I live, or I lived, depending on which part of this story you're in a three-bedroom house in Savannah, Georgia, the same house I moved into when my daughter was 4 years old. I bought it on my own. I was a school secretary for 31 years, and I saved carefully, and I lived simply. And when the time came, I bought that house with a down payment I had put together, dollar by dollar. My name was on the deed. Just mine. That always mattered to me, though I never thought I'd have to say it out loud. My daughter is Vanessa. She's 38 now. She's the kind of woman who's capable of more than she allows herself, if that makes sense. She has a good heart, buried under a lot of people-pleasing. And for most of her adult life, the person she pleased most was her husband. His name is Drew. I'll say this plainly. I did not dislike Drew when they first got together. He was charming in that particular way that certain men are charming, in effortlessly, selectively, and only when it benefited him. He had a good job in commercial insurance, nice clothes, and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Vanessa loved him completely, and because I love Vanessa, I tried. They got married 6 years ago. For the first 3 years, they lived 40 minutes away in a rental, and things were fine. We had Sunday dinners. He called me Miss Roberta. He fixed the hinge on my back gate once without being asked, and I thought maybe I was wrong about him. Then the company he worked for restructured, and Drew lost his job. I want to be careful here because losing your job is hard. I know that. I've seen it break people. So when Vanessa called me crying and asked if they could stay with me for a few months while Drew got back on his feet, I said yes without hesitating. Of course, that's what mothers do. That's what family does. A few months. That was 2.5 years ago. The first year, I told myself it was an adjustment. Two adults living in someone else's home. There would be friction. I gave them the master bedroom because it had its own bathroom and I thought it would give them privacy. I moved my things into the smaller room at the back of the house. I didn't complain about that. I told myself I was being generous, and I was. I told myself a lot of things that year. Drew found freelance work eventually. Some of it consistent, some of it not. Vanessa was working full-time as a dental hygienist and bringing in steady income. They weren't broke. That was something I noticed gradually, and then all at once. The way you notice water rising, not when it starts, but when it reaches your knees. They started eating out several times a week, ordered things online that arrived in boxes I had to step over in the hallway. Vanessa bought a new set of luggage for a trip to Charleston, just the two of them, a long weekend. None of that is wrong. People spend their money how they choose. But they never once offered to pay a utility bill, never asked about the property taxes, never said, "Roberta, what can we contribute?" I brought it up once, gently, in the spring of that first year. I said something like, "It would help me if we could work out some kind of arrangement." Drew looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something mildly embarrassing, then looked at Vanessa, and Vanessa said, "Mom, we're trying to get stable. You know that." And I let it go. That was my mistake, and I've made peace with owning it. I let it go too many times. Each time I stepped back, the space I left didn't stay empty. Drew walked into it. By the second year, something had shifted in a way I can only describe as a slow replacement. The house still had my furniture, my photographs on the walls, My mother's quilt folded over the back of the couch, but the energy of it had changed. The television in the living room was always on whatever Drew wanted to watch. He had a specific chair, my chair, the one by the front window, that he had claimed without ceremony. The one I used to sit in to read the paper every morning before anyone else was awake. I started getting up earlier to beat him to it, and then one day I realized what I was doing, and I felt something cold move through me. He started having opinions about my house. Not suggestions. Opinions, stated as facts. That back bedroom could be a home office. That was his office now, my sewing table pushed against the wall. We should get a bigger refrigerator. We, as if he had purchased anything in that kitchen. The garage is too cluttered. He had started parking his car in my garage. My car was in the driveway. I said less and less. Vanessa noticed, I think, but didn't say anything, which became its own kind of message. The clearest sign, the one I should have acted on, came on a Sunday afternoon in October. My neighbor Cora came over to sit on the porch the way she and I had done for years, just coffee and conversation, and watching the street. Drew came outside, stood in the doorway for a moment, and said, with Cora right there listening, "Roberta, I'm going to need you to keep the noise down. I'm on a call." Cora looked at me. I looked at my hands. "Of course," I said. Cora left 30 minutes later. She squeezed my hand on the way out and didn't say anything because she didn't need to. The morning it finally broke open was a Saturday in March. I had woken up early, the way I always do. My body still runs on school secretary time, up before the sun, coffee before 6. I went to the kitchen, made my coffee, and then settled into the living room with my Bible. That was my time. That had always been my time. The house quiet and dark, and mine in a way it only felt before anyone else was awake. I was sitting in the chair by the window, my chair, when I heard Drew's footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. I noticed, in that particular way you notice things when you've been watching someone for a long time, that he didn't slow down when he saw the light was on. He walked into the living room, stood in the middle of it, and looked at me the way you look at something out of place. "I'm going to have the guys over today," he said. Not a question. "I need the living room." I looked up from my Bible. "I'm sitting here." "I know," he said. "I need you to find somewhere else to be." I want to describe what happened inside me in that moment because it wasn't what I expected. I thought later that I should have felt rage or hurt. Instead, I felt something very still and very clear settle over me, the way the air feels right before a storm breaks, when everything goes quiet and certain. I closed my Bible. I said, "This is my house, Drew." He looked at me without blinking. "Vanessa and I live here. It's our home too." "You're a guest in my home," I said. My voice was even. I surprised myself. He made a sound, half laugh, half dismissal, and said, "We've been here 2.5 years. I think that makes us a little more than guests, Roberta." He had never called me Roberta before. It was always Miss Roberta. That detail landed somewhere specific in my chest. "I'll be in my room," I said. And I went. I sat on the edge of my bed in my own house, listening to the sound of his friends arriving, the front door opening and closing, laughter from my living room. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just sitting, very still, while something inside me finished making a decision that had been forming for a long time. I picked up my phone, not to call Vanessa, not to call a friend. I called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Osei, a housing attorney my co-worker Bess had mentioned years ago, the kind of referral you tuck away and hope you never need. I had never called her before. Her office was closed on Saturdays, but she had an emergency line, and I suppose what I was experiencing qualified. She called me back within the hour. I explained the situation quietly and precisely. The house was mine, my name alone on the deed and the mortgage, which I'd paid off 11 years ago. My daughter and her husband had been living there for 2.5 years with no formal agreement, no rent, no written arrangement of any kind. Patricia Say listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "In the state of Georgia, they are considered licensees, not tenants. That's actually simpler than tenants in terms of removal, but it still requires proper notice. I'd recommend a formal notice to vacate. 30 days is standard. Would you like me to draft it? Yes, I said. Are you sure you want to proceed? I thought about Drew's face that morning, the sound of his voice saying my name the way it wasn't supposed to be said, my car in the driveway while his sat in my garage, Cora squeezing my hand on the way out. Yes, I said again, I'm sure. I want to tell you what I did while I waited for Monday morning, because I think it matters. I did not confront Drew. I did not pull Vanessa aside and issue warnings. I did not make the atmosphere in the house thick with tension or give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. What I did was this. I went about my normal Saturday. I made myself a sandwich. I called Bess and talked about her grandchildren for 45 minutes. I sat in my back room and hemmed a pair of curtains I'd been meaning to finish for weeks. Drew's friends left around 9 that evening. He came down the hall to the kitchen for a glass of water, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing a crossword. We exchanged exactly nothing. He went back to the bedroom. I finished my crossword and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in months. On Monday morning, Patricia Osei's office called at 9:15 to confirm the notice had been prepared. A process server delivered it to the house that afternoon. Certified legal official. I was not home when it arrived. I had driven to the library, chosen 3 novels I'd been meaning to read, and gotten a coffee at the cafe across the street. I sat there by the window and read the first chapter of the first book, and I did not look at my phone until I had finished it. Vanessa called me 4 times in the space of an hour. I let them go to voicemail. Then she called from a number I didn't recognize, a colleague's phone, and I answered. Mom. Her voice was somewhere between angry and frightened. What is this? What did you do? I sent a notice to vacate, I said. You have 30 days. You can't, Mum. You can't just do this. We live there. This is our home. I had thought about what I would say in this moment. I had thought about it carefully, the way you think about something that matters. Vanessa, I said. It is my home. I have never asked you or Drew for $1 in 2.5 years. I have never asked for help with the taxes or the utilities or the upkeep. What I asked for was basic respect. And last Saturday, in my own living room, your husband told me to find somewhere else to be. In my house, in my chair, in front of no one but me. Silence on the line. You were there when I needed you, she said finally. Her voice had changed, smaller. I know, I said. And I love you, that does not change. But love does not mean I surrender my home. She started crying. I listened. I didn't apologize because I had nothing to apologize for. When she quieted, I told her that I would help her find resources for transitional housing if she needed them, that I would not make this ugly if she chose not to, that I hoped on the other side of this we would find our way back to each other. Drew never called. That told me everything I had suspected and tried not to believe. They were out in 26 days. Vanessa stayed with a friend from her office. Drew, I heard through the particular social grapevine that exists in a city you've lived in for decades, went to stay with his brother in Macon. I drove home on a Thursday afternoon and sat in my car in the driveway for a moment before going inside. The house smelled different. I can't explain it exactly. Not bad, just occupied in a way that wasn't mine. I opened the windows in every room. I moved my car into the garage. I reclaimed my chair by the front window. I sat in it with a cup of coffee and the late afternoon lights coming through the glass, and I thought about my mother, who had always said that a woman's home was her peace, and that once you gave that up, it took something out of you that was hard to name and harder to get back. I had gotten it back. That surprised me. How quickly it settled, like the house had been waiting for me to remember what it was. A few things I've learned that I want to say plainly because I think some of you listening have been in a version of this room. I waited too long. I know that. The first time I felt uncomfortable in my own home, and said nothing was the first brick in a wall I helped build around myself. I told myself it was love, and it was, love is real, but love without limits is not generosity. It is an invitation for the wrong person to take more than they were offered. If someone is living in your home and you are walking on eggshells in your own hallway, something has gone wrong. You are allowed to name it. You are allowed to do something about it. The law was not the enemy of my family. The law was the only language Drew understood, and perhaps the only language he needed to hear. A piece of paper did what 2 years of silence and accommodation could not. Vanessa and I are still in contact. It is not easy. It is the careful, tender kind of contact that happens after something breaks and you are learning, slowly, whether it can be repaired. She has not blamed me, not directly. I think in whatever part of her is honest with herself, she knows what happened in that house. I think she has always known. I do not hate Drew. Hate is heavy, and I am 67 years old, and my mother's cast iron pot is still in my kitchen, and there is a mockingbird outside my window right now, loud and unbothered and completely at home. Like me. If you are holding your breath inside your own walls, let this be the thing that tells you the paperwork is not cruel. The boundary is not betrayal. You are not wrong for wanting peace in the space your own name is on. Some decisions look harsh from the outside. From the inside, they feel like the first deep breath you've taken in years. I took mine on a Thursday afternoon, in a chair by the window, with the Georgia sun coming through the glass just right, and no one in the world telling me to move. I think about that cast iron pot a lot. The one I bought for $2.50 at a yard sale in 1987. It has outlasted 3 stovetops, 2 kitchen renovations, and 1 marriage that wasn't mine, but managed to take up residence in my life anyway. There is something honest about a thing that does exactly what it was made to do, year after year, without asking for recognition. I wasn't that honest with myself for a long time. What happened in my house over those 2.5 years didn't start with Drew walking into my living room that Saturday morning. It started the first time I felt uncomfortable and chose silence over truth, and then the second time. And the third. Each small surrender felt like kindness in the moment. I told myself I was keeping the peace, protecting Vanessa, being the bigger person. But there is a difference between being generous and erasing yourself, and I had spent 2 years confusing the two. The consequences of that confusion were not random, they were direct. When I stopped holding the line, Drew stepped over it, not because he was a uniquely terrible person, but because I had shown him, through my own actions, that the line could be moved. We teach people how to treat us. That is not a comfortable truth, but it is a true one. And the moment I was willing to look at it clearly, really clearly, without flinching, was the moment I was able to do something about it. That clarity is its own kind of strength. Not the loud kind, not the kind that raises its voice in the kitchen or slams doors or makes speeches. The kind that sits very still on the edge of a bed in a back room, listens to the sounds of strangers laughing in its living room, and decides, quietly, finally, without drama, that enough is enough. That kind of strength is built slowly. It requires you to know what you value, to think past your immediate fear, and to act even when the action is hard and the outcome is uncertain. I was 67 years old when I made that phone call to Patricia Osei. People might hear that and think I waited too long. Maybe I did. But I also think that the woman who made that call had something the younger version of me didn't quite have yet. The settled understanding that self-respect is not selfish. That protecting your home, your peace, your name on a deed you earned, is not a betrayal of love. It is in fact the most honest thing you can do for everyone involved, including the people who have taken advantage of your softness. Vanessa and I are still finding our way back to each other. That is slow work. But it is real work, built on something more honest than what we had before, when I was disappearing room by room and calling it grace. The mockingbird is outside again this morning, loud, territorial, completely unbothered about who was here before it or who might come after. It knows exactly whose branch it's sitting on. I'm learning to be a little more like that,